Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The maps were spread out. The screens flickered with satellite feeds, encrypted chatter, and scrolling coordinates. Voices overlapped in the dim-lit room, clipped, confident male. And there she was, seated near the end, her notepad untouched, her pen resting against her knuckles, waiting for a pause that never came. They hadn't asked her a single question, not one. She listened anyway, listened to the drone of plans drawn by men who had dismissed her from the moment she walked in. The youngest in the room, the only woman, a face too unfamiliar, a name too untested. Her pulse was steady, but her chest carried that familiar weight, the one that pressed down every time she was underestimated, every time she had to decide whether to push back or let silence do its work. She didn't push this time. She let them talk. She let them pretend she wasn't there. Because what none of them knew, what none of them could guess, was that she carried something they didn't. Not just skill, not just training, something heavier, something unshakable. But she wasn't going to show them, not yet. A storm had been building outside, and the faint crackle of thunder bled through the walls. The briefing dragged on. Targets discussed, fallback points debated, extraction routes traced across digital terrain. It was all clean, too clean. Plans always looked like that before reality tore them apart. Her eyes lingered on one sector, a narrow valley shrouded in tree lines with one single dirt road snaking through. She noticed what they hadn't, no mention of civilian patterns, no heat signatures flagged, but she remembered something. A report, a note she wasn't supposed to keep. Families had been sighted there weeks earlier, refugees hidden in plain sight. Her jaw tightened. No one had brought it up, no one had checked again. And if they were still there, buried in the silence of that valley, then this mission wasn't just a mission. It was a test, a question waiting for an answer she wasn't sure anyone else in this room cared about. The colonel's voice snapped her out of thought. His tone carried the weight of command, but also that faint edge of dismissal he'd reserved just for her. Assignments stand. You've all been briefed. Wheels up at 0300. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, boots shifted, and still not a single pair of eyes turned her way. She rose quietly, gathered nothing but her pen and a folded slip of paper in her pocket, and when she stepped out of that room, her silence wasn't defeat, it was patience. Because she had learned long ago, patience was a weapon. Outside, the air was heavy, thick with rain not yet fallen. Floodlights cut pale arcs across the tarmac where helicopters rested, dark hulks under the storm. She paused at the edge of the hangar, letting the noise of the briefing dissolve behind her, and finally breathed. Her fingers brushed the scar just below her collarbone, hidden by fabric, unseen by most but always there. A reminder, not of weakness but of the fire she carried. That scar wasn't from training, it wasn't from drills, it wasn't even from combat the military acknowledged. It was older, deeper, a mark from the night she'd learned that being ready had nothing to do with approval. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the memory tried to claw its way back, the shouts, the heat, the blood. She pushed it down, but only just. She had told no one about that night. Not here, not among the ranks, but it was the reason she had made it this far. The reason she had walked into that briefing room despite every voice saying she didn't belong. And now, standing alone by the rain-slick pavement, she understood something the others didn't. This mission wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It wasn't just another set of coordinates on a map. It was going to test all of them. She felt the first drop of rain against her cheek. The storm had arrived. Hours later, the barracks hummed with the low energy of soldiers preparing for deployment. Some sat sharpening blades. Others wrote letters they would never admit to writing. A few tried for uneasy laughter, half-hearted jokes about food waiting back home or promises to drink twice as much when they returned. She walked past them all, her duffel slung across her shoulder, her rifle case in her hand. The same rifle she had kept pristine, not out of obsession but respect. Every weapon had its soul, she believed, and hers had saved her more times than luck. One of the younger privates glanced up at her. His face was pale, too pale, betraying nerves he hadn't learned to hide. He caught her eye for a second, then quickly looked away, embarrassed. She paused. First mission. He nodded, not meeting her gaze. Yeah, just trying to, not screw it up. Her tone softened. You won't. Just remember, it's not about being fearless. It's about acting anyway. He blinked as if surprised by her answer. He almost smiled, but it faltered. They say you're, different, that you don't. He stopped himself. She didn't press. She just gave a small nod, then continued on. Different, that word again. It had followed her since training. Sometimes spat like an insult, sometimes whispered like a secret. Different because she didn't break the way others expected her to. Different because she didn't fight for approval. Different because her silence unsettled those who didn't understand it. But silence wasn't emptiness. Silence was focus. She settled into her corner bunk, laying her gear down with quiet precision. Around her, the storm rattled the windows, a constant percussion that masked the heartbeat in her ears. Someone switched off the main lights. The barracks dimmed into scattered shadows. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the hours pressing closer. Her thoughts circled the same unspoken truth. She couldn't tell them. Couldn't tell the colonel, the squad, anyone about the valley, about the people who might still be there. Because if she did, they'd dismiss her again. They'd bury it under protocol, paperwork, excuses. And she couldn't afford that. The storm rolled louder, and with it came a memory she couldn't silence. A face, a voice, someone she had lost that night, long before the uniform, long before the scars. She turned to her side, eyes tight, jaw locked. Sleep wouldn't come, but that was nothing new. When the alarm finally blared, slicing through the darkness, she was already awake. Boots hit the floor, belts buckled, rifles checked. The storm hadn't eased, and the air outside smelled of wet iron as they marched toward the waiting helicopters. She moved with the others step for step, but inside she carried something they didn't. A fire, not loud, not dramatic, just steady, quiet, unshaken, unforgettable. And though no one had asked her at the briefing table, though no one had cared what she saw in that valley, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Before this mission was over, they would. The rotor blades carved the night. Rain slashed sideways across the tarmac as the squad moved in staggered formation, packs weighing heavy, eyes narrowed against the storm. The helicopters loomed like steel beasts, engines thrumming with restrained violence. Each man and woman climbed aboard with the same ritual movements: check, step, secure, breathe. She was the last one in, always the last. The cabin reeked of fuel and damp canvas. Dim red light washed over their faces, hollowing eyes into shadows, sharpening jawlines into stone. No one spoke above the roar of the engines. Not yet. Not when the silence still mattered. She strapped in, rifle pressed tight against her chest. Her hands steady, her heart steady, only her thoughts raced. Would the valley be empty, just as the colonel's maps promised? Or would it hold what she feared most, people who didn't belong in crossfire, people who would pay the price of oversight? She couldn't ask, couldn't warn, not now, not here. The bird lifted, shuddering into the storm. Wind hammered against the frame, rattling bolts and helmets alike. Outside, the world dissolved into black rain and the occasional flash of lightning that lit up the wet, endless jungle below. She closed her eyes for a beat. The hum of the blades blended with memory. A different storm, a different night. Smoke in her lungs, the sear of fire licking her skin, the sound of a scream cut short. Her hand twitched where it rested on the sling of her weapon. The scar below her collarbone pulsed like it remembered too. She forced the image back. Not now. A hand tapped her shoulder. It was the young private from the barracks, his face pale in the glow, his voice pitched to be heard. You ever get used to this? She studied him for a moment, the nervous twitch in his fingers, the sheen of sweat on his temple despite the cold. "No," she said finally. "You just learn what part of the fear you can carry." He swallowed, then nodded. He didn't ask what she meant. The sergeant across from them broke the moment with a sharp glance. "Save it for the ground. We need heads clear." His tone carried authority, but underneath was something else: fatigue. The sergeant was older, lines carved deep around his mouth. He had the look of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. She had heard whispers about him: 3 tours, 2 injuries, 1 family that didn't wait for him. He caught her watching, and for a second his gaze softened. A recognition, maybe. A quiet understanding of being marked in ways others couldn't see. Then it was gone, replaced by the hardened mask. The helicopter dipped suddenly, banking left. A low curse rippled through the squad. She felt her stomach lurch, but her grip didn't falter. Lightning flared again, illuminating the endless dark ridges ahead. The pilot's voice crackled in their headsets. "ETA 15 minutes, hold tight." 15 minutes. That was all the time she had to decide. Speak now, risk dismissal, maybe even jeopardize the mission. Or stay silent, carry the weight herself, and find a way to act when the moment came. She pressed her lips together. Silence was still her weapon, for now. The helicopter shuddered as it cut through turbulence. One soldier muttered a prayer under his breath. Another closed his eyes, lips moving with a rhythm that might have been a song once sung to him as a child. Small things people carried into war, fragile as glass. Her eyes drifted back to the maps burned into her mind. That valley, that dirt road, that chance no one else wanted to see. When they landed, she would know. The storm thinned as they neared their drop zone. Rain softened into mist, the jungle below rising up in black, dripping canopies. The air inside the cabin shifted, tense, alert. Hands flexed around weapons, shoulders squared. The sergeant's voice cut through. "Check your gear, 2 minutes." Clicks of magazines, the metallic slide of bolts, the muted thump of boots tightening straps, every sound a ritual, a preparation against chaos. She checked her rifle last, fingers brushing the scope, the barrel, the sling, her breath steady, her thoughts anything but. The helicopter began its descent. Leaves whipped in the downdraft below, scattering shadows like frightened birds. The squad leaned forward as the skids touched down, mud splashing upward, rotor wash tearing through branches. "Move," the sergeant barked. Boots hit earth. One by one, they spilled into the jungle, swallowed by green shadows and wet soil. The helicopter rose again, its roar fading into distance until the night reclaimed silence. They were alone now. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of moss, rot, and gun oil. Every step sank slightly into the ground, mud sucking at their boots. The storm's remnants dripped from branches, a steady patter like 100 unseen watches. They moved in formation, rifles raised, eyes cutting through darkness. No words, just hand signals, nods, breath. She kept her place near the rear, scanning angles the others ignored. Every shift of leaf, every trickle of water down bark, her senses drank it in, searching for the one thing she feared finding. The valley lay ahead, hidden still, waiting. Minutes stretched into an hour. The jungle pressed close, thick enough to swallow sound. Only their breathing, their boots, the occasional snap of a branch underfoot betrayed them. At one pause, the private leaned close, whispering, "Feels like the whole place is watching." She didn't answer, because he was right. Her thoughts circled the silence. What if they reached the valley and it was empty? Would she feel relief or shame for doubting? And if it wasn't empty, if civilians were there, what then? Would she have the strength to go against her own orders? The question burned hotter with each step. The sergeant raised his fist. The line froze. Up ahead, the ground began to dip. The tree line shifted, opening into a faint clearing where mist hung low, curling like breath. This was it, the edge of the valley. Her pulse spiked, not with panic, but with the sharp clarity she always felt when things turned real. The squad crouched, eyes scanning. Nothing moved. No figures, no lights, just the hush of leaves and the drip of water. The colonel's maps had been clear, empty. The sergeant's voice carried certainty when he whispered, "Looks clean, advance slow." But her gut twisted. Her eyes traced the road cutting through the mist. The same road burned into her memory. And then, a flicker. Not movement, not exactly. Just the faintest shift of shadow against a hut-shaped outline near the tree line. Too still, too human. Her breath caught. The private beside her whispered, "What is it?" She didn't answer, couldn't, not yet. Because in that hut, in that valley, there was either nothing at all or everything she had feared. And whichever it was, she knew the moment of silence was ending. She raised her fist, mirroring the sergeant's signal without thinking. The squad froze, rifles snapping up, breath held in the mist. The hut was still, too still. Her scope caught edges, rough wood, patched roofing, a faint sag where rain had chewed the walls thin. But it wasn't the structure that made her pulse spike. It was the absence. No smoke from cooking, no tools outside, no movement. And yet she could feel it. Someone was inside. Her jaw clenched. Should she say it? Call it out? Break her silence and risk the look, the one she'd seen in training, in briefings, in every man's eyes when she dared to speak against certainty? The sergeant motioned forward, slow advance, sweep and clear. Her boots pressed mud. Every step sank, sound swallowed by wet earth. Her rifle aligned with the doorframe as the squad fanned out. 2 soldiers flanked left. 1 curved right. The private stayed close, his breathing uneven in her ear. She wanted to whisper, to warn, but her throat locked. The first soldier reached the hut. He pressed flat against the wall, signaled. Another stacked beside him. Their hands tightened on grips. Then the crash. The door slammed open, a rush of voices spilling out, high-pitched, panicked. Not shouts of fighters, not ambush calls. Children. She felt it like a blade to the chest. Small bodies tumbled out, barefoot, eyes wide with terror. A woman followed, hands raised, her voice sharp but pleading in a tongue not meant for this war. Behind her, 2 older men, thin, gray with hunger, carrying nothing but the weight of survival. The squad froze, fingers hovered on triggers. The sergeant's curse sliced the silence. Civilians, damn it. Her breath poured out all at once, relief sharp and bitter. But the relief didn't last, because she knew if this hut held people, there were more. Families scattered across the valley, unseen on the colonel's maps, ignored in his words. And they were all in the line of fire. The private lowered his rifle too slowly, his hands shaking. One of the children sobbed, clinging to the woman's leg. Another pressed their face into her dress. The sergeant barked, low but firm. "Secure them, keep moving, mission stands." Secure them, as if lives could be folded and stored like equipment. Her chest tightened. Her silence, once a weapon, now felt like betrayal. She finally spoke. "There'll be more, this isn't the only hut." Heads turned, even the sergeant's, his eyes cut sharp, warning in them. "Stay in your lane, soldier." She didn't flinch. "Sir, the maps are wrong, this valley's not empty, we can't." "Enough," his voice dropped lower, harder. "Orders stand, we sweep, we clear, we move." The squad shifted uneasily. Eyes darted from her to him. No one spoke, but she could read it in their silence. They didn't want to be here, didn't want to face what this meant, but they wouldn't say it. She had. The sergeant's stare lingered, then snapped away. "2 men stay back, the rest on me, move." And just like that, the squad split, advancing deeper into the valley, leaving her with the gnawing truth no one wanted to see. The woman clutched her children, whispering in their ears, eyes darting with fear at every rifle barrel pointed her way. Her body trembled, but her voice didn't. She begged, words spilling fast, urgent, in a language no one here understood. Except her. Not every word, but enough. She had learned fragments long ago during months spent in a place no one in this squad knew she had been. Words for hunger, words for safety, words for please. Her throat tightened. The woman was saying, "Don't hurt them. Please don't." Her silence shattered. She crouched, lowering her rifle, her voice softer, shaped to the woman's tongue as best she could. "Safe. We safe." The woman's eyes snapped to her, searching, measuring. The children stilled. Their sobs hiccuped into silence. For a second, the world shrank to nothing but that look, a mother's desperate search for truth. The sergeant barked from ahead, "Move out now." She rose slowly, torn between two worlds, obedience and fire. The private lingered, his eyes wide. "You understood her." She didn't answer. They advanced again. The mist clung tighter, the jungle pressing like a weight. Every hut they passed, and there were many, carried the same story. Women, children, old men, none armed, none part of this war. Her chest ached with every step deeper. Orders screamed one thing, her conscience another. The sergeant's pace never faltered. He didn't look, didn't acknowledge, maybe couldn't. She wondered if he saw what she saw, or if he had already locked it away, buried under duty, protocol, survival. The valley stretched wide now, the dirt road glistening under mist, footprints stamped fresh into mud. Proof, evidence, lives scattered just ahead. Her hand brushed her scar without thinking. That night, that fire, that scream, it wasn't just memory, it was warning. She whispered under her breath, a truth no one could hear, "Not again." But she knew silence alone would not stop this. Not this time. They set camp as dawn clawed at the horizon. Pale lights spilled over treetops, turning mist gold for a fleeting second before it burned away. Soldiers crouched low, weapons angled outward, scanning for threats that weren't the real danger. The real danger was orders. The sergeant barked assignments, watches set, patrols rotated. No one spoke of the civilians, no one dared. She sat apart, her rifle across her lap, eyes locked on the valley below. Smoke trails rose faint from distant huts, families cooking, trying to live beneath the shadow of a war they hadn't asked for. Her chest tightened until she thought it might break. The private dropped beside her, canteen in hand. His voice low, careful, "You were right, weren't you, about the valley?" She didn't look at him. "Doesn't matter." "It does," his voice cracked. "They're just people." She finally turned. His face was pale again, jaw tight, eyes too young for this kind of weight. "You'll carry this," she said softly. "All of it. You think it gets easier. It doesn't. You just decide what you can live with." He swallowed, the truth of it sinking deep. She looked back at the valley, her decision already forming. Because she knew what she could live with. And what she couldn't. The sergeant's radio crackled, orders relayed from command, targets confirmed, air support on standby. The valley was marked red. Her blood ran cold. Air support, on coordinates that weren't empty, on huts where children hid. She rose before she even thought it through. "Sir." The sergeant's head snapped toward her. The squad fell silent. Her voice steady. "Those coordinates are wrong. There are civilians." The air grew thick. The weight of her words hung heavy, undeniable. The sergeant's jaw worked. His silence said everything he knew, he had known. "Stand down," he growled. "That's not your call." Her hands curled into fists. Her voice sharpened. "If you let that strike happen, you're not clearing an enemy. You're killing families." The squad stared, caught between them. The storm inside her broke open. The scar burned like fire. Her silence was gone now. And there was no turning back. What happens when silence is no longer an option? The squad stared at her, caught between her words and the sergeant's command. The valley stretched below, morning light painting huts in fragile gold. Smoke from cooking fires drifted skyward like fragile signals no one wanted to read. Her chest rose, fell, her voice steady. "There are civilians, you know it, I know it." The sergeant's jaw clenched, his face a mask of discipline, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of something else. Conflict, guilt, maybe even shame. "Stand down," he said again, sharper now. "That's an order." She didn't move. The private shifted uneasily beside her, his fingers tight on his canteen. His whisper cracked the silence. "She's right." Every head turned. The boy's face flushed, but he didn't back down. "I saw them too, kids, families." The sergeant's glare could have burned holes through steel. "Enough, we follow command." She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her hand still rested on her rifle, but she didn't lift it. Not yet. Her words carried more weight than steel. "Command isn't here," she said quietly. "We are. We're the ones looking into those huts. We're the ones who'll hear the screams if that strike goes through." The squad held their breath. The sergeant's voice dropped raw. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't seen what happens when orders come down blind?" His mask cracked for half a second, pain bleeding through before he caught it again. "But it's not your place to decide. You break the chain, you break everything." Her scar throbbed like a heartbeat. The memory clawed back fire, smoke, a voice silenced forever because no one had spoken up. She swallowed hard, forcing air past the lump in her throat. "I won't let it happen again," she whispered. The sergeant froze. "Again." The word hung heavy in the air. The squad didn't know what it meant, but the way her voice broke on it, they felt it. The radio crackled, cutting through the silence. A voice sharp, detached thousands of miles away. "Strike window confirmed. 2 minutes. Clear zone." 2 minutes. Her stomach dropped. The sergeant turned, barking, "Mark position, flares up." Her body moved before thought. She grabbed his arm, yanking it down before his hand could reach the signal pouch. The squad jolted, rifles half raised in instinct. His face snapped toward her, furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Her voice cut like glass. "Saving lives." The private stood frozen, torn. Another soldier muttered, "She's gonna get us killed." The sergeant shoved her back, his hand iron on her shoulder. "You're out of line, soldier, out of line." But she didn't falter. "And you'll be out of your soul if you let this happen." The words cracked something, not just in him, in all of them. Because everyone knew, everyone had seen, and pretending otherwise was breaking more than orders, it was breaking themselves. The radio barked again. "Confirm clear zone, 1 minute." Her mind raced. Options. None that didn't cost her everything. She could fight him. She could drag him down. She could fire her weapon not at him but into the air, into the ground, anywhere to stop the strike. But then, court-martial, prison, her career shredded, her life branded. And yet the alternative was unthinkable. Her breath slowed, her scar burned. She knew the choice had already been made the night she earned it. Her hand went to her rifle, not to raise it but to unclip the sling. She stepped forward, eyes locked on the sergeant. "I'll do it myself," she said. For a heartbeat the squad froze. No one moved, no one breathed. The sergeant's face hardened, but his eyes wavered. For the first time, he looked not like a wall of command but like a man staring into the reflection of his own conscience. The radio's final call pierced the standoff. 30 seconds. Her voice rose, not loud but unshakable. "If you won't stop it, I will, and you'll have to shoot me to stop me." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, full of fear, of memory, of every soldier in that squad realizing what they were about to let happen, and who among them had the fire to stand against it. The sergeant's jaw trembled. His hand hovered near his flare pouch. Then, with a guttural curse, he ripped the radio from his vest and snarled into it. "Negative strike. Repeat, negative strike. Civilians in the zone. Abort." Static crackled, a pause, then the cold voice of command, "Say again." He looked at her. His eyes burned with rage, with defiance, with reluctant respect, and he said it again. Louder, "Civilians in zone, abort mission." The pause stretched forever. Then strike aborted, hold position. The squad exhaled as one. Shoulders sagged, fingers loosened from triggers, the weight of what almost was pressed down on all of them. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Her heart hammered against the scar that had burned her alive all these years. The sergeant turned back to her, his voice low, dangerous. "You just ended your career." Her eyes didn't waver. "I just saved theirs." The woman's face, the children's eyes, the gray old men with nothing left but silence. They were alive for now, and that was enough. The private whispered, almost reverent, She was right." The sergeant didn't answer. He only turned away, his shoulders heavy, his silence louder than any order. That night the squad sat around dim lamps, their gear stacked, their bodies still tense. No one spoke of what happened, not directly, but their silence carried it, heavy in the air. One soldier muttered about how command wouldn't let this slide. Another stared into his rations, chewing without taste. The private kept glancing at her, as if seeing her for the first time. She sat apart back against a tree, rifle across her knees. Her eyes tracked the valley's huts below, faint lights glowing like fragile stars. Her thoughts spun, relief, fear, anger, all tangled into the quiet fire she carried. She knew the cost. The sergeant hadn't lied, she had crossed a line that command never forgave. Obedience was the currency of survival in this machine, and she had just burned hers to ash. But deep inside, beneath the scar, beneath the uniform, she knew she would do it again, every time. Because there was more at stake than orders. There was humanity. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed her eyes, listening to the night, to the faint sounds of children laughing somewhere far below. A fragile sound. A sound that mattered more than any medal, any rank, any approval she had never been given. Her fire was quiet, her fire was unshaken. And whether command knew it or not, it was unforgettable. The summons came at dawn. The squad had barely shaken the dust of restless sleep from their eyes when the radio crackled with clipped precision. "Unit Bravo 7, report to forward command, immediate." The sergeant didn't look at her, not once. He just shouldered his rifle, his movements mechanical, each strap and buckle cinched with angry precision. The others followed his rhythm, silent, heavy-eyed. Some stole glances her way, but no one spoke. She knew what the order meant. The choice she made yesterday hadn't evaporated with the night. It had only grown, sharp as glass in every heart. And now command wanted an answer. The tent was suffocating. Maps sprawled across tables, radios hissed, the air reeked of stale coffee and wet canvas. At the center stood the forward commander, a colonel with a face carved from stone and eyes colder than the metal stars on his chest. The squad lined up, boots aligned, rifles slung tight. The colonel's gaze swept across them like a blade, then it stopped on her. "You," he said, voice flat, dangerous, "step forward." Her boots felt like iron, but she moved. One pace, two. The floor creaked under her weight, but she stood tall. "Name," the colonel demanded. "Private First Class Martinez, sir." "Martinez," he said it like a curse. "Explain why yesterday's strike was aborted." Her throat tightened. The silence stretched, the squad stiff behind her. She could feel their breaths, shallow, waiting. She could lie, say nothing. Pretend she'd seen nothing but shadows in the huts. Pretend the sergeant had acted alone. But the scar on her ribs pulsed. The fire it left behind demanded truth. "Because there were civilians in the zone, sir." The colonel's expression didn't change. "And who confirmed this?" Her voice didn't falter. "I did." The tent fell silent. Radios hissed. Somewhere outside, a helicopter's rotors thudded against the morning air. "You interfered with a lawful order," the colonel said slowly. "You endangered the mission. You compromised command authority." Her chest rose, fell. She answered quietly, "I saved lives, sir." The words echoed in the tent like a stone dropped into still water. For the first time, the colonel's mask cracked, not into sympathy but into fury. He leaned forward, voice sharp enough to cut. "Your duty is not to think, Martinez. Your duty is to obey. You think war gives you the luxury of choosing when to follow. You think chaos waits for your conscience to catch up." The words slammed into her, but she didn't bend. Her scar burned, the memory whispering, the screams, the fire, the silence of the friend she couldn't save. She met the colonel's eyes. "Sir, if obedience means killing children, then I'll take disobedience every time." Gasps broke behind her. Someone's boots scraped the floor. The colonel's jaw locked. His face darkened, but his voice grew cold, almost soft. "Then you are not a soldier." The sentence was final. But before he could continue, another voice broke in. "Sir." The squad froze. Every head snapped to the side. It was the private, the youngest among them, the one who had spoken up yesterday. His voice shook, but he stood straighter than he ever had. "She's telling the truth. I saw them too." The tent went still. The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Repeat that, soldier." The boy swallowed hard. There were civilians, women, kids. If we'd marked that strike, they'd be dead. The colonel's stare could have drilled through walls. His voice dropped into lethal quiet. "And you chose not to report this until now." The boy faltered. His courage cracked, but he forced the words out. Because I was scared, but she was." Silence fell again, heavy, suffocating. The colonel's gaze shifted back to her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then with a sharp gesture he barked, "Sergeant." The sergeant snapped forward, boots thudding. "Take Martinez into custody. Await further orders." Her heart lurched. The sergeant stepped toward her, his shadow stretching across the dirt floor. His face was unreadable, his movements rigid. Her squadmates stood frozen, caught between fear and guilt. No one moved, no one spoke. She didn't resist. When the sergeant's hand gripped her arm, she let him. The metal of his fingers bit against her sleeve, heavy, final. The makeshift holding tent was little more than canvas walls and a folding chair. Her rifle had been stripped from her. Her vest lay on the ground outside. A soldier posted nearby with his weapon resting across his knees. She sat, hands on her lap, staring at the dirt. Every sound pressed in, distant engines, muffled orders, the clatter of gear being packed. The war churned on outside, indifferent. Her scar throbbed. Her mind replayed the colonel's words, the sergeant's silence, the boy's trembling defiance. "You are not a soldier." Maybe he was right. Maybe what she had done severed her from the brotherhood she once fought to belong to. But then maybe she had never been part of it at all. Not really, not in the way they wanted. Because being a soldier to her had never been about medals or ranks or orders barked from miles away. It had been about the faces she swore to protect, about the fire she carried in silence. And if that was wrong, then she would carry wrong like a banner. Hours bled into each other. The sergeant came once, standing in the doorway. His eyes lingered on her, unreadable. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked away. The boy came too, slipping past the guard when he could. His words were clumsy, but his eyes burned. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "Even if they don't see it, I won't forget." She gave him the faintest nod, the smallest gift she could offer, acknowledgement. By nightfall, she was still alone, still waiting, still wondering if the next voice she heard would be her last as a soldier. The order finally came. 2 guards entered, their expressions flat. "Command wants you on the next transport," one said. "You'll face tribunal at base." Her pulse slowed, so this was it, the beginning of the end. But as they led her through camp, past the squad she had once stood shoulder to shoulder with, something shifted. The private raised his head, eyes following her. Then another soldier did, then another. Not a word was spoken, not a salute, but in their silence something stirred, not obedience, not fear, something else. Recognition. Because they had seen, they had felt, and though their voices were shackled, their hearts weren't blind. The transport roared into the night, engines drowning the silence. She sat inside, wrists bound, staring out through the small grated window. The valley shrank below, its hut still standing, lights still glowing like fragile embers. She breathed slowly, deeply, the scar on her ribs steadying with every inhale. She didn't know what awaited her: court-martial, prison, disgrace, maybe worse. But she knew this. They were alive. And for her, that was enough. Because sometimes being a soldier doesn't mean following orders. Sometimes it means standing alone, branded traitor, so others can breathe one more day. Her eyes closed. The hum of the engines filled her ears. Her story was not ending, not yet. It was only becoming something else. Something command couldn't control. Something unforgettable. The room smelled of dust and polish. Wooden benches lined the walls, rigid, unwelcoming. A flag drooped in the corner, heavy with silence. 3 officers sat at the tribunal table, their uniforms crisp, their faces expressionless masks of judgment. She stood before them, wrists free now, but it made no difference. The weight pressing on her shoulders was heavier than any chain. The colonel wasn't here. Only his shadow, carried in every page of the report stacked neatly on the table. Her name, her record, her disobedience, condensed into paper. Cold, lifeless paper. Private First Class Martinez, the presiding officer began. His voice was smooth, practiced. You are charged with insubordination, dereliction of duty, and willful disobedience of a direct order. Do you understand the charges? Her voice barely rose above the echo of the room. Yes, sir. The officer leaned forward slightly. And how do you plead? She hesitated, not because she doubted, but because she knew the answer carried no weight here. Truth had no standing in a room built for discipline. Still she raised her head, not guilty. The words dropped like stones into a pond. The officers didn't flinch. They had heard it before. The trial began. Witnesses were called. A communications officer testified about the aborted strike. His words were clipped, professional. He spoke of protocol, the chain of command, the breakdown of discipline. The sergeant was called next. He stood rigid, shoulders squared, eyes locked straight ahead. His voice carried no warmth, no hint of the man she had once thought unshakable. She refused a lawful order, he said. The mission was compromised. Her stomach tightened. He didn't look at her, not once. Then came the private, the youngest. His palms shook as he took the stand, but his voice carried further than it ever had in the field. I saw them, he said. Civilians, kids. She stopped it because she had to. The presiding officer cut in. Did you report this through proper channels? The boy faltered. No, sir, I was afraid. Afraid of what? His eyes dropped. Afraid of being ignored, afraid of being punished. The officers exchanged glances. One scribbled something on a page. The boy's words trembled into silence, but the seed was planted. It hung in the room like smoke, impossible to clear. Then it was her turn. She stepped to the stand, her boots clicking against the floor. She sat, spine straight, though every muscle screamed to fold under the weight of the room. Private Martinez, the officer said, explain your actions. Her throat felt dry, but her voice was steady. I saw civilians in the strike zone. I couldn't ignore it. Your orders were clear, the officer countered. Identify and confirm the target. Relay coordinates. Why did you refuse? She looked down for a moment, then back up. The scar on her ribs throbbed, memory clawing at her chest. Because I've seen what happens when we're wrong, she said quietly. I've seen friends burn. I've seen the wrong people pay. The officer's tone sharpened. This tribunal isn't about your past, Private. It's about your failure to obey." Her voice broke through, firmer this time. "Then maybe obedience isn't enough." The room stiffened. Even the guards shifted uneasily. She went on, her words carrying their own gravity. "We're told our orders keep us alive, that following them makes us soldiers, but I've learned something different. Orders don't save lives, choices do, and I chose." The officers didn't reply. Their faces gave nothing. But she saw it, the faintest flicker, a hairline crack in the wall they built around themselves. The tribunal adjourned for deliberation. She was led to a holding room, its walls bare, its silence pressing against her like a second skin. She sat alone, staring at the table in front of her. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt hollow. What would they decide? Dishonorable discharge, prison, worse? The answer didn't matter as much as it should have. Because in the echo of her words, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. She felt unbroken. Meanwhile, back at the forward base, whispers spread. Soldiers gathered in mess tents, around fire barrels in the shadows between patrols. They spoke low, careful, but the words carried. "Did you hear what she said in tribunal? They say she stood up to the colonel himself. Some are calling her reckless. Others, they're calling her brave." The squad was divided. The sergeant said nothing, his silence a wall no one could climb. But the private's words lingered. Each retelling sharpened them, gave them weight. "She saved those families," one soldier murmured. "She saved us too, in a way." For the first time, her defiance wasn't just hers, it was spreading, quiet, infectious. Back in the tribunal room, the officers returned. Their expressions were unreadable, their steps measured. They sat, papers rustled. The presiding officer cleared his throat. "Private Martinez," he began, his voice even. "This tribunal has considered the evidence, the testimonies, and your defense." She braced herself. "You are hereby found guilty of insubordination." The words hit, heavy but expected. "However," the officer continued, "given the circumstances and the corroborating testimony, this tribunal has determined that your actions, while unauthorized, may have prevented unintended loss of life. Therefore," the pause stretched, thick, suffocating, "you are hereby sentenced to reassignment, effective immediately." Her heart stuttered. Reassignment, not prison, not discharge. The officer's eyes met hers for the first time. For the briefest moment, something human flickered there. Respect, pity, she couldn't tell. "You will report to your new command at 600, he finished. The gavel struck, final. She stood, her breath shallow, her scar aching with every beat of her heart. Not freedom, not punishment, something in between. The transport carried her through the night again. This time the horizon stretched open, endless. She sat by the window, watching shadows melt into dawn. Her squad was behind her now, the colonel too. But their eyes would remember, their silence would echo. And somewhere, the family she saved were still alive. She pressed her palm lightly against her ribcage, feeling the faint burn beneath. Her story wasn't over. If anything, it was just turning a corner. And as the sun broke across the horizon, she whispered to herself, quiet enough for only the sky to hear. "They said I wasn't ready, but I am. I always was." The wind swallowed the words, carrying them forward into whatever waited next. They didn't tell her where she was going. Only that the transport wouldn't stop until the horizon broke into mountains, jagged silhouettes, teeth tearing at the sky. The ride was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of loose gear. She sat alone in the back, helmet resting on her knees, eyes tracing the streaks of dawn through the grated window. A new assignment, a sentence disguised as a chance. She wondered what they saw in her, a liability, a lesson, or something harder to name. When the truck finally ground to a halt, dust curling into the pale air, She stepped out into a place that felt like the edge of the world. The outpost wasn't much, a cluster of prefabricated shelters clinging to the mountainside, antennas stabbing into the clouds, sandbags piled in uneven walls. The air was thinner here, sharper, carrying a silence that pressed on the ears. Waiting for her was a captain she didn't know. His face was worn, leathered by weather and years, his uniform stained and frayed at the seams. His eyes scanned her with the efficiency of someone who had stopped wasting time on introductions. "Martinez?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Welcome to Echo Ridge. You'll find this is like where you came from, fewer men, fewer eyes, more ghosts." His words weren't a warning, they were a promise. The outpost housed fewer than 20 soldiers, faces drawn, movements clipped, laughter non-existent. They carried themselves like shadows, each one hollowed by a fight no one outside these mountains cared to understand. Her bunk was nothing more than a cot wedged into a corner, a duffel bag thrown at her feet. The walls were thin, the cold sharper than any blade. But she didn't complain, she had forgotten how. Her first task came before sunset, a patrol along the ridgeline. She walked the narrow path with 2 others, a medic with haunted eyes, and a radio operator who spoke in whispers, as though the rocks themselves were listening. The wind screamed through the valley below, dust clawed at her eyes. Her rifle was heavy, steady, her only anchor. It wasn't until the sun dipped, painting the peaks blood red, that she realized the silence wasn't natural. It was watching. That night she couldn't sleep. The cot creaked under her weight. The thin blanket clung to her, but the cold still seeped through. Every sound echoed, boots crunching gravel outside, distant murmurs, the low crackle of the radio. Her scar throbbed. Memories clawed their way back, the tribunal's gavel, the colonel's voice, the sergeant's silence, the boy's trembling defiance. She turned onto her side, staring at the shadowed ceiling. This wasn't punishment, not exactly. It was exile. A place to bury soldiers who made too much noise. But even here in the dark she knew, exile didn't mean silence. Not for her. The next day, she learned what Echo Ridge truly was. It wasn't just a listening post. It wasn't just a patrol point. It was a tripwire, the thin line between safety and disaster. They weren't here to win battles. They were here to survive long enough to report when the enemy came. The captain explained it without ceremony. "We're not heroes here. We're warnings. If the mountains move, we light the signal. If we're lucky, someone hears it before we're gone." The words chilled her more than the wind ever could. To be stationed here was to live in the shadow of sacrifice. She looked at the men around her, their hollow eyes, their clenched jaws, and understood why their laughter had died. They weren't waiting for victory. They were waiting to be erased. Days blurred. Patrols along jagged cliffs. Nights huddled around dim lanterns, trading fragments of stories that ended mid-sentence. The medic once mentioned a daughter back home, then fell silent, staring into the flame until his eyes glassed over. The radio operator admitted he hadn't slept a full night in weeks, afraid of what silence on the channel might mean. Each story was a shard of glass, cutting her deeper. These men weren't here because they were chosen. They were here because they were forgotten. And now she was one of them. But unlike them, her fire hadn't gone out. Not yet. One evening, the captain called her into the command hut. He laid a map across the table, his finger stabbing at a circle drawn deep within the valley. "Intel says movement here. Could be nothing, could be everything. We need eyes. You're on point." Her pulse quickened. She nodded. The captain studied her for a moment, his gaze heavier than the map. "I read your file," he said. "I know why you're here." Her chest tightened. "You think that makes you different," he went on. "Maybe it does, but difference doesn't keep you alive out here. Watch yourself, Martinez. This place doesn't forgive." He didn't wait for her response. He rolled up the map, shoved it into her hands and walked out. She stood there, the weight of the paper heavier than any rifle she had ever carried. The mission came before dawn. The valley was shrouded in mist, the rocks slick beneath their boots. She moved with a three-man team, the medic, the radio operator, and a scout whose silence was colder than the air. Every step felt like a countdown. They reached the ridge, set up position, scanned the valley below. For hours nothing, just mist shifting and curling like smoke. Then movement. Figures in the haze, shadows where none should be. She steadied her rifle, breath slow, heart pounding in her ears. Not civilians this time, armed, advancing. The scout whispered into the radio, voice tight. Confirm hostiles, multiple, advancing fast. Static answered, then silence. The operator's hands shook. He tapped the device, whispered again, nothing. The signal wasn't getting through. Her scar burned, her gut twisted, this was it. The warning, the tripwire. They were the line. And the line was breaking. Back at the outpost, the captain paced, listening to the dead air on the radio, his jaw clenched, his fists curled. He knew what that silence meant. But still he waited, because waiting was all he could do. In the valley, the mist thickened. The figures grew clearer, rifles, helmets, the glint of metal. The medic's breath quickened. The scout's hand hovered over his weapon. Her eyes narrowed. Her finger rested on the trigger, steady, deliberate. One choice could set it all aflame. One hesitation could end them before they began. And in that heartbeat she knew. Echo Ridge hadn't been her punishment. It had been her test. The tribunal hadn't buried her here. They had thrown her into the fire to see if she would burn out, or burn brighter. Her chest rose, her scar seared. She whispered to herself, quiet, unshaken, unforgettable. I was ready. And then, for the first time since her reassignment, she squeezed the trigger. The hangar was quiet again. Not silent, never truly silent, but stripped of the chaos that had filled it hours ago. The echoes of boots had faded. The hum of engines was gone. Only the muted tick of cooling metal and the faint draft through the half-open bay doors remained. She stood there, still in her flight suit, helmet tucked under her arm, her other hand trembling against the side of her thigh. No one spoke to her. They didn't need to. They had already said it all in their eyes. She had walked back alive. Not all of them had. The debrief was short, clinical, brutal, losses logged, mission marked. No one mentioned her name. No one pointed out what she had done. No one thanked her for pulling the trigger when no one else could. She had seen the faces of the ones she couldn't save. They would follow her longer than any medal ever could. But in the silence, something shifted. One of the younger soldiers, barely 20, shaking, wide-eyed, approached. He didn't salute. He didn't know what to say. He simply handed her a folded scrap of paper. His handwriting was rough, hurried. 4 words, "You kept me breathing." Her chest tightened. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear the weight of gratitude when her own heart felt hollow, but she nodded just once. He stepped away, and that was enough. The world outside the hangar was no calmer. The wind carried dust across the tarmac. The setting sun bled orange against the horizon. She walked out slowly, every step heavy, every breath sharp. The mission had ended, but the war within her had not. She thought of her family, faces blurred by distance, voices she hadn't heard in months. She thought of her father's warning the day she enlisted. They'll tell you you're not ready, and maybe you won't be, but when it comes, you'll know. You'll feel it. She had felt it too soon, too hard. And yet she hadn't broken. Somewhere inside the fatigue, beneath the guilt, beyond the ache in her bones, there was a quiet fire that hadn't gone out. A fire no one had expected. The kind that burned without needing to be seen, without needing to be praised. The kind that simply endured. In the days that followed, the story spread, not officially, not through reports, but through whispers, through the way the younger recruits looked at her when she walked past, through the silence of her peers who no longer questioned her place among them. They had doubted her, mocked her readiness. but she had stood in the storm, unshaken, unforgettable. One evening, as she sat alone cleaning the dirt from her gloves, a fellow pilot passed her by. He stopped, hesitated, then said, almost softly, "They said you weren't ready. Turns out you were the only one who was." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. Because readiness had never been about perfection, or bravado, or proving someone wrong. It had been about holding steady when everything else fell apart, about carrying the weight when no one else could, about the dignity of doing what had to be done, even when it left scars no one would ever see. And so she sat there, quiet in the fading light, unshaken by the world's noise, unforgettable not because of her victories, but because of her silence. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.